Am I the asshole for suggesting my wife consider a new therapist? Hoo boy, here we go. If my wife has one big flaw, it's jealousy. She has areas in life she doesn't feel she measures up, her career, personal projects, and looks. And if someone in her life succeeds in one of these areas and outdoes her, she's outwardly congratulatory but inside she's grieving her own lack of accomplishment. For instance, she's been overweight, out of shape her whole life. But when person X runs a marathon, something she's never wanted to do, she still feels unworthy. It really prevents her from being happy in life. So 6 months ago she finally decided to seek therapy. She found a Skype therapist and really enjoys her sessions. And things have changed. A lot. This therapist is really big on self-compassion, being kind to yourself, choosing things that bring you joy, etc. My wife is hard on herself, so this all sounded great. But I feel like things have been taken to an extreme. She has distanced herself from a ton of people in her life, including close family members and friends, due to their successes. She claims being kind to herself means avoiding their accomplishments. She no longer tries at any of the hobbies she wanted to achieve in. She spends her evenings after work watching TV, eating junk food, etc. She's choosing joy. But to me she doesn't seem all that happy. It just seems like she's trying to protect herself from the world and her therapist is encouraging it. So when she told me she decided to stop writing, her biggest dream in life, because she'll never finish the novel, I suggested a new therapist. This ended in argument and she's not really speaking to me right now. Am I the asshole? Not the asshole. Either this therapist is a total hack or your wife is deliberately misconstruing good advice as a way to justify giving up on life entirely. After all, you can't fail if you don't try. You're definitely not an asshole for being concerned about your wife and you're only trying to help her. From what you've said, nah. Therapy takes a long time, and it isn't linear. 6 months into therapy, I was the worst I'd ever been, because I was confronting and properly processing some heavy stuff for the first time in my life. That processing was necessary for me to get to the much more stable place I now am. And I made mistakes and misapplied or failed to apply what my therapist had said. It's hard work, reprogramming yourself. When you poke at a scar, sometimes the scar starts to bleed. There's any number of analogies and metaphors I could make here, but that's how therapy often goes. 6 months is still very early days. Not the asshole. It sounds like this is part of her journey. Maybe she is creating space between herself and certain others so she can do her inner work without pressure from them to be a certain way, or it might be because she is encountering feelings of guilt if she thinks she may have hurt those people and she isn't quite ready to deal with that, or something else. She'll be changing and that may mean your experience of relationship with her also changes. If you love her then keep doing your best to stick by her, support her, and it may be difficult but try to avoid controlling the pace or direction of her therapeutic process. Nah, she's working on establishing a new self-driven baseline for happiness and being around other people is gonna fuck up her baseline. I get you're concerned but she has to get familiar with being happy while alone in order to take that mindset out with her into the real world. Inner peace isn't achieved in a couple of weeks. Solitude is a normal part of growth. Think of all the stories and myths we have about people going into the desert alone for months and returning with greater peace and enlightenment. Solitude is very useful when you're working on yourself. Leave her alone, she's in the middle of her 40 days and nights of solitude. Not the asshole, but it is a very common thing for people to intentionally misconstrued, twist advice from therapists to justify their own desires. It's also possible that she was making herself miserable around those friends and family members and she needs some space. It's good to have a conversation with her, and, if she is comfortable, maybe with her therapist. But don't jump to any conclusions. Info. How do you know she isn't happy now? I'm going to go against the grain and say a very soft you are the asshole. Sometimes giving up on a dream is the right thing to do because you have reached a stage in your life where you are a different person now and that is no longer your dream. There is a lot of pressure in society to always want the same things you did when younger, to always have the same hobbies and interests, etc. I think the therapist might be allowing your wife to let go of those things so that she can find new hobbies, dreams and things to take place of the old things. So that she can have new things that suit who she is more now at this current stage in her life. It could be that a lot of her jealousy came out of feeling trapped and stagnant. She needs room to let go of the old to take in the new. Nah, I've found that sometimes, you have to let people figure things out themselves. Nothing said about the therapist sounds alarming, and this isn't necessarily affecting you, so I'd say hunker down and try to trust the process. She'll likely get to a point where she wants to pick up her hobbies again because she loves them, not because she's in an invisible competition. That time isn't now, though, it's only been 6 months. Trust the process. None of you are assholes here. In fact, I think you have a big heart and your wife should be commended for doing the hard thing by trying to shed this self-comparison. Therapy is hard work, and she's doing it. Not the asshole. Your wife is practicing escapism and this isn't something any therapist should condone. Especially if it means she has this mentality of, if I try nothing, I can't fail at anything. No assholes here, therapy devotee here. It's really hard to say if the therapist is not a good fit or if your wife is insulating herself from pain rather than addressing it. If she is truly spending a lot more free time eating junk food and watching TV, that isn't great. But therapy is a process. They may be leading her to doing better slowly. Ask if you can perhaps sit in with her so the therapist can explain what you can do to support her. From there you can gauge if the therapist sucks or if they just aren't the kind you would like for yourself. Not the asshole, but your wife isn't jealous. She has a poor self-image and lacks confidence and has negative self-esteem. These are the things her therapist should be working with her on. Positive self-talk and building her self-worth, which will not be done on the couch. Don't get me wrong, I love my couch item and I need it, but I also know that I need to work on things that make me feel good about myself. I think a new therapist is in order. Not the asshole. Honestly, I don't think the therapist is at fault. Instead, it sounds like your wife is incorrectly applying what she learned. Soft, you are the asshole. I don't think it's your place to question her therapist if she has not brought up her own concerns. Also, as someone who has spent 1.5 years in therapy, sometimes the first step is distancing yourself from upsetting things, people. It can take a long time to feel comfortable and secure enough to build up your relationships again. She's most likely doing this to protect herself while she processes things, which is completely normal. It sounds like you're just adding unnecessary pressure and guilt, even if it is out of concern for your wife. Not the asshole. Your wife is picking and choosing what parts of therapy to practice. Yes, being kind to oneself is important, so is accepting and loving yourself. However, not at the risk of isolation or developing unhealthy habits. A new therapist may or may not help with these issues. It's difficult to tell without hearing from the therapist. Nah, I don't want to make any assumptions about your communication, so let me know if I'm off base. Therapy can be a long, messy process with many weird stages along the way. 6 months is really early days for a first-timer. While I think you're right to be concerned, I don't think you know enough about her journey with therapy to decide that the therapist is or is not working for her. This might just be a messy stage. Instead of trying to fix things for her, I would suggest gently inquiring about what she's going through right now and sharing your concerns with her. Your heart is totally in the right place and you seem like a great partner. Trust that she's an adult who can make decisions for herself and try and get a better idea about what's going on with her. Not the asshole. But it is worth remembering that before things get better with therapy, it often gets worse. That's why so often people are told to wait until they're stable enough to handle it. It takes a long time in general from first identifying problematic behaviors to choosing healthier ones, and although your wife has clearly identified the problems, it doesn't sound like she's choosing the healthy coping strategies just yet. It could be that more time is needed before sincere and positive changes are made. Relearning your entire mental processing will take time, and for now it seems she is just trying to cut the detrimental cycle she has found herself in. Info. I don't think it's the therapist's fault. This is how she chooses to interpret the advice. How long has this behavior been going on? Has she had many sessions since then? Might be this is a phase and she's working through things. Not the asshole. Speaking as a therapist, I've had a lot of people misconstrue what I say to get to the outcome they want. I totally get that you want your wife to be healthy and happy, but you should consider what she could be telling the therapist. She might be telling her something like, "This is the most comfortable time of my life and I'm doing great." You might want to ask your wife if you can do a session together with the therapist, because at the end of the day you're just concerned. Not the asshole. Avoiding problems only makes them bigger. What will happen if you succeed in a way that makes her feel inadequate? Will she start avoiding you? This isn't healthy or sustainable. Tell her you're glad she's feeling happy but that you're concerned because this isn't a long-term solution if it's affordable. Suggest she just talk to a few other therapists with an open mind and give it a go. She needn't immediately stop seeing the one she's with, but this just won't work for long and will probably lead to bigger fallout, sadness than before. I'm licensed in my professional life. I say that because if you look at my profile you couldn't I do this as a release. But anyway, it's very common that right before a breakthrough in therapy, there is a great deal of regression exhibited by the individual. Therapy brings up some painful, heavy, deep-rooted issues to surface and oftentimes people regress initially as a defense mechanism. Make sure her therapist is following appropriate practice guidelines. For example, a faith-based or preacher is not a licensed clinical one. Make sure they are LCSW or have a degree in practical counseling with a minimum of master degree and are in good standing with the board and licensed. This is public info. You should be able to Google it. Sometimes, it takes going to an extreme for a little bit to get to the point where you're stable enough to make your way back to the middle and cope. It's why sometimes a short inpatient stay can see someone making breakthroughs that a year or more of outpatient counseling didn't. When you're an inpatient, all those other contacts and responsibilities and interests are abruptly cut off, and all you get to focus on is the daily routine and yourself. 6 months of counseling isn't a long time. Encourage her to figure out what she wants to do now, and keep observing. You may find that in another couple of months, she slowly starts reintegrating things and people. I think therapy is also making her reassess her own likes and needs. Maybe those projects she stopped are actually hurting her by continuing the cycle of self-hate for lack of accomplishments. And there's nothing wrong with cutting off relationships that don't bring you any joy or self-worth, which also sounds like she's trying to heal. Maybe her family raised her constantly comparing her to other members, so now as an adult cutting those people out means she won't have to compare herself anymore. I wonder if this is sort of a phase your wife needs to go through on her way to figuring out that she can accept her friends' accomplishments or her limitations in certain areas without completely distancing herself from them. I doubt the therapist is telling her to do all this stuff. Maybe your wife is just overcorrecting. Have you shared your observations in a compassionate way? NSH, but you need to know that therapy has a lot of different cycles and takes a while. I think it is a mistake to place judgment on the therapist or your wife. Let her heal the way she needs to. After going through intense therapy myself, there were lots of changes I made in order to recalibrate. She needs to be trusted to sow this in a way that gives her permission to accept herself, and sometimes that makes no sense to outsiders looking in. Nah, definitely doesn't sound healthy, but it could also seem temporary. Maybe she needs a little time to completely let all that stuff go before figuring out what really does bring her joy for its own sake. Not the asshole, but all to join in on one session. Bring up your concerns there. Honestly, not the asshole. I personally haven't made such experiences, so I can't really form an opinion on this. This is just out of curiosity. Maybe she misunderstood her therapist's advice? It's not bad advice, so I'm kinda confused about the way she processed things. Also, I hope that therapy will be successful for her in the future. Folded hands. Nobody deserves to suffer with themselves in any way. Not the asshole, but are you sure it's the therapist and not what your wife is taking from it? Unless you are sitting in on these sessions, you can't know, and I don't believe a therapist would encourage her to retreat from family members just because they have success. I think your wife is making it what she wants and likely not giving you or the therapist full truths. Nah, she's trying. Healing is not linear. She needs to figure things out a step at a time, and it means she might be in that place until she figures enough out that she can move forward. It's evolution, not overnight change. Keep being a supportive husband. You're both doing the best you can. Folded hands heart. You aren't the asshole, but let me tell you, someone goes into therapy with a desire to get something out of it. No new therapist will fix your wife's problem of wanting to displace her own feelings of shame and envy rather than kindle actual self-esteem. As an aside, particularly evil therapists groom clients to need them, not to heal. If the therapist has no plan that ends with, and then we have our last session and you move on, then at the very least, she is incompetent. Not the asshole. I also think the therapist isn't the issue, and the issue is how your wife is misconstruing the information to protect herself from anything difficult, rather than address her issues. Instead of following the joy writing brings to her and not focusing on fear of failure or getting bogged down by the undertaking, accepted the fear as reality, she's given up instead of focusing on the enrichment those relationships bring to her life and not focusing on the jealousy. She's distanced herself so she doesn't have to grow. Hard to gauge this one without hearing her side or what is really being advised by the therapist. I'll say no assholes here, but kind of leaning toward you are the asshole, to be honest, because you sound a bit interfering and judgmental. It's okay to take a break from people and just be. It sounds like the therapist just wants her to completely free herself of external and internal pressures for a while so she can recalibrate and discover what she really wants in life. Maybe she was forcing herself into those hobbies because she felt like she had to appear useful, interesting. I think you have an idea of what the APRI should consist of and a particular timeline of results. There's no quick fix to a lifetime of low self-esteem. It's okay to express your concerns once or twice, but don't push it. Not the asshole. Since this has ended in an argument, why not suggest you feel you would benefit from going to some sessions with her? Ask to join sometimes in order to better understand and gain knowledge on how to support her. Instead of changing what she seems to feel is successful, try to join in and help. That way you both are working towards a goal. Question. Does your wife really want to be a writer? Or is it maybe something she's told herself she wants? Sometimes letting go of our own expectations for our future selves is the only thing that gives us the freedom to find what truly gives us joy. And yeah, there may be an in-between period with junk food and bad TV. Edit. Typo. It could be a resting point. It sounds like she has been running around in circles. Maybe she has to give up for a little while and regroup. Like maybe she's in a cocoon and she will finally emerge as who she wants to be. Not the asshole. I saw a post the other day talking about how another form of hidden depression is being all happy and smiley during the day, only to go home and do nothing, staying isolated until you have to get up and do it all over again the next day. Actively stopping doing things that bring her joy seems like a recipe for disaster. While your message may not have been well received, you're a good husband for recognizing how counterintuitive that therapist's advice is. Info. Where did you get your very set ideas on how your wife ought to live? How she should behave in order to be happy? Dreams change over time. That's just people changing over time as they have different life experiences. It isn't a flaw. You seem to be deciding that therapy is not working, because it is not giving you what you want, expect to see? Not the asshole. There are a lot of fly-by-night therapists out there and even more springing up due to the pandemic, so your concerns are fair. However, you have not been part of their sessions, so I can see why an outright dismissal of the techniques might rankle. Think your best bet is to avoid an accusatory or critical tone and just suggest that she get a second opinion, or maybe you could look into finding someone you both like with whom you can work as a couple. Either way, I hope you find a way to move forward. All the best. I just finished school to be a counselor and did my internship at a site where we used self-compassion and the humanistic approach a lot with our clients. I'm going to say that this approach is never meant to have someone do what your wife has done. So either your wife is choosing to take this advice in a very different direction or the therapist is doing it wrong. I even wonder if your wife is letting the therapist know these things? If my client regressed this much, I'd be deeply concerned. Honestly, I am unsure, as I don't know your wife or her friends. Maybe her friends are unbearable show-offs. Perhaps she never actually liked writing, and it was her crutch to feel important. I dunno. However, I do know that self-compassion should be done while acknowledging uncomfortable feelings, not avoiding them. Here's a good resource on the subject, and I hope all will be well with your family. Not the asshole. Your wife is willfully misconstruing her therapist's advice. I'd suggest that you actually have a family day with her therapist. I used to bring family into my session every once in a while to communicate my issues. Maybe you and your wife can see her therapist together and you can explain to them what you've been observing. Because I doubt the therapist knows what your wife is doing. RN. Not the asshole. Is it possible that she has ADD and some of the mental difficulties that come with? It really seems like she's in a blame self spiral, and that's part of ADD for sure. Full disclosure, in my 60s and recently diagnosed. If she's a blocked creative, ditching writing will make her feel temporarily better and long-term much worse. Not the asshole. Your suggestion is coming from a place of concern and care. I'm not sure what advice the therapist is giving, whether your wife is misconstruing it, so perhaps before a new therapist is sought, the original one could be made more aware of what she is doing, e.g. cutting out her support network. Also, I think your wife is conflating joy with instant gratification. It may help her to view her options and decisions as a choice between pleasure, instant gratification, and joy, long-term happiness. So for example, junk food may give me instant pleasure, but a healthier choice will give happiness. Not the asshole. Yip, time to find a therapist that can help her with her real problems, not just keep her happy by avoiding. Info. Can you suggest to your wife to do a joint session? My spouse and I were in a similar scenario, me with crippling depression, spouse trying to help me but not knowing how. One joint session was enough to drastically change the tables. It helped my therapist immensely, getting candid information about my behavior from my spouse that wasn't filtered by my own perception. Literally night and day change for me. PM me if you want more detail. Not the asshole. I'm a therapist and your wife had completely misconstrued what it means when we say, be kind to yourself. I tell my clients that all the time, but I don't mean for them to stop pushing themselves to achieve all that they can. Being kind to yourself means not beating yourself up if things don't work out the way you hoping. It doesn't mean don't try in the first place. As for a new therapist, that could be a good idea. Maybe she needs a therapist that will gently challenge her a little bit. Not the asshole. Her therapist ways are not good for her. She is making her issues worse by completely sheltering herself. Not the asshole. This does not sound like a good therapist. A therapist is supposed to help you develop strategies to help you cope with the things you're struggling with. Sure, self-compassion should be a part of it, but not to the point where you're just avoiding the things that make you uncomfortable instead of working on making those things less uncomfortable for you. Not the asshole. Obviously the therapist is just encouraging to not achieve anything and close her eyes saying, I am perfect. That will just lead to an early grave and you and her unhappy in the long run, and in general, this is really not good. Info. Is she being honest with the therapist, or is she painting a rosy picture because she doesn't want conflict with someone who listens to her? If she is being honest, then by all means, get a different therapist. If she isn't, that's not the therapist's fault. You only get as much out of therapy that you're willing to put in. If you're not willing to be honest to the therapist and yourself, there is absolutely no point.